Hey everyone, Dave here, coming to you from the basement because my brother's currently asleep in the bedroom, and I didn't want to disturb him while discussing Paranoia by Brad Jones and Ryan Mitchell.
My name's Mark Bishop. It's just been a really hectic night.
Okay, Paranoia is a pretty vague title. I think just about every low-budget filmmaker has worked on a movie called Paranoia. I was a producer on a short called Paranoia in college. It was a very silly short about a plant that turned people into zombies that was defeated by silverware. And my point is, the name Paranoia didn't really apply very much to that short film. It applies a little more here, but there are a lot of names that this movie could have had. Paranoia is a perfectly apt title for this movie, but it's not very descriptive. Now, I got this when it came out, and I wanted to watch it at least twice before really formulating my thoughts on it, just because it's a movie with a twist ending, and the way I personally judge if a twist ending holds up is how the knowledge of the ending affects the second viewing of the film. So I finally had the time to watch it for a second time last night, and I think the twist ending worked. It's certainly the kind of ending that can be a cliche cop-out, but I think it was used well in this case. I don't want to spoil too much in this review, but overall I enjoyed the film, but it had its flaws, of course, and I'm going to discuss the flaws first, just to get them out of the way. And before I sound like I'm being too harsh on the film, I want to make it clear that just about every problem I have with this film is a problem that I find in my own work, and part of the reason these problems stick out to me is because I'm so used to judging myself for committing these problems, so it makes it more noticeable when I see other people do it. And I don't mean to bash the filmmakers who put a lot of hard work into this, and I think they did a fine job, but I need to be fair, and I need to point out the things I didn't like. As I said, there are a couple things in the film that come across a little cliché, which is kind of par for the course for an independent thriller, and as much as I enjoyed the film, there were several scenes that I felt like I had seen done many times before. And certainly they were done well here, they just didn't surprise me very much. The dialogue is never terrible, but like many independent thrillers, there's a lot of dialogue that's, let's just call it thematic exposition. Everybody's reiterating not the story information for the movie, but just the themes of the movie, saying, well, it's just one of those nights. Everyone gets paranoid on nights like this. Making big generalizations relating to the theme of the movie. And while the dialogue's never terrible, sometimes it's either taking itself a little too seriously, or maybe it's just playing itself for really dry genre parody. It's written by Brad Jones, so who knows? The production is mostly good, but there's some editing that could have been trimmed a little bit, and there's some pretty bad sound editing. The background noise will adjust wildly from cut to cut, and again, I know from my own work how tough it is to deal with background noise, and how sometimes you don't have any other choice but to leave it and just hope it doesn't bother people. And in this case, it wasn't too distracting, but it was noticeable. There's also quite a few shots in the movie where there's very clearly a key light right off camera, even though there's no logical light source in that direction in the story. But, even professional movies have that problem. I remember Shutter Island has the scene where they enter the mausoleum and there's a light coming from beneath a tomb or something, and I'm like, yeah, what light source is that supposed to be? And yes, I'm disappointed by the scant number of bonus features. Now, the commentaries are great, and the interviews are pretty good, although they're at a really low video resolution. I realize there's only so much space on a DVD, but on the vlogs on the Cinema Snob site, they implied that there would be more behind-the-scenes footage that they didn't show us because of spoilers, and I'm hoping we see that footage eventually. And then one final thing I have to say about the disc itself. The label on this disc is a bit thicker than DVD labels tend to be. Something about it, I'm not exactly sure what it is, but I know that this disc actually got stuck in one of my DVD players when I was trying to eject it, and I had to go in with a screwdriver to get it out. That's probably not going to be a universal problem, because I didn't have that trouble on any of my laptops or on my Blu-ray player, but it means that I'm certainly not watching this disc on my DVD player upstairs again. I think it's just because that DVD player has an unnaturally shallow tray, I guess. But I've never run into that problem before with the DVD, and again, I didn't run into that problem with any other player. Um, but just, if that happens to you, it happened to me too. Fortunately, I have plenty of other disc players I could watch the movie on, so that's not too big a concern. Now, the film is described on the Walkway Entertainment site as being a sort of blend of Hitchcock and Wes Anderson. I'm not sure if those are the filmmaker names that come to mind for me. I mean, I know Hitchcock is kind of just shorthand for, oh, it's suspenseful, so it's like Hitchcock. But honestly, the filmmaker that came to mind for me was Christopher Nolan. Not necessarily in terms of directing style, but just in terms of story content. I mean, yes, stylistically it's very different from Nolan. It doesn't have the characters with the massive exposition mouth. It has the thematic exposition mouth, but not like the, oh, well, if we go into the deeper level of the dream, then this will happen, then and this will happen, and also if Gotham City happens to this, blah. Yeah, it doesn't have those traits of Christopher Nolan, but there were just story elements. You know, some things reminded me a little of Memento, some things reminded me a little of Inception. I don't know, that's just what I was reminded of while watching it. And that's not a bad thing. I like Christopher Nolan's movies. I think he has some really interesting ideas in his stories, and I think Paranoia had some pretty interesting ideas in its stories. I mentioned the story had some cliche elements, but it still kept my attention overall. Even when I wasn't surprised, I was still gripped. I never got bored watching the movie. I was always interested to know what happened next and where they were going with it. And I think a lot of that, aside from just being a decently told story, I think a lot of that is just Brad Jones's inherent charisma as a performer. Brad Jones has a great screen presence, as anyone who saw Kick-Assia or Suburban Nights certainly knows. His character in Kick-Assia was actually a real grounding presence among the Looney Tunes, Zucker Brothers type silliness that was going on out there. He was sort of like there as like a snarkier Margaret Dumont sort of grounding role, or a snarky, I guess more like Zeppo if I'm going with the Marx Brothers thing. But again, he held his own as a joke teller, but he also played mostly a straight man to all the zaniness in Kick-Assia. And that screen presence serves him well in this movie, since a lot of the movie is him on his own, or him interacting with just one or two other people. He needs to carry this movie, and I think he succeeds. Again, maybe it's because I was already a fan of his, I don't know, but he's very compelling to watch in this movie, and if you're a fan of Brad's, you should definitely see this to see him play a slightly more serious role with better production values than his older stuff that he sometimes posts on the site. Also, it was a little hard to take some of the actors in the movie seriously, through no fault of their own. It's just that I'm used to seeing these people in much, much sillier videos on the Cinema Snob website, and so it made it a tiny bit difficult to take a scene seriously when there's, you know, Jared sitting there playing an important and a serious role, but all I can think of is Brad and Jared videos. That may be unfair of me to say, because it's not Jared's fault, but when you've seen him in some of the silliest videos on the site, it can take away a little bit of the weight his role has. I'm sorry, Jared. I thought you did a fine job in the movie. I just need to separate your roles in my head a little better. It's great to see Brad in a role that takes itself a little more seriously, with decent, if not flawless, production values. And I heartily recommend that every fan of Brad's stuff check out this movie when you get a chance, because I'd love for it to do well enough that their next movie can be even better, and some of these editing glitches or little production glitches can be improved on, because again, it's not a perfect movie, but it's better than most of the crap I've produced, and it certainly shows a lot of promise, and I'd love to see where they go with their next project.